It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The Chancellor defends hiking taxes and boosting welfare spending in her budget.
I do recognise that I was asking ordinary people to pay a little bit more, but I've managed to keep that contribution as low as I possibly can.
But the Conservatives tell Rachel Reeves that she should resign over broken promises on tax.
That smorgasbord of misery we just heard from her can be summed up in one sentence. Labour are hiking taxes to pay for welfare.
Tonight, we'll assess what it all means for you, for the economy and Rachel Reeves' future. Also ahead, 2 members of the US National Guard are shot and wounded close to the White House in Washington, D.C. 40 people die and almost 300 others are unaccounted for after a huge fire in Hong Kong. A former Royal Marine admits driving his car into a crowd of Liverpool supporters at a victory parade. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello, good evening. A year ago, the Chancellor said she wouldn't come back with more taxes. But today, Rachel Reeves hit working people with a budget containing tax hikes amounting to £26 billion. She told Sky News that she recognised she was asking people to pay more, but insisted her plans were both fair and necessary. But the U-turn on taxes was seized upon by the Conservatives, who told the Chancellor to resign and dismissed her announcements as a budget for Benefit Street, paid for by working people. Well, let's take a look then at the key measures announced by Rachel Reeves. Well, firstly, income tax thresholds will be frozen for another 3 years, dragging more people into a higher tax bracket. There's also a change to pensions, with salary sacrifice contributions above £2,000 to be subject to national insurance payments. Meanwhile, tax rates on dividends, property and income from savings will all increase by 2 percentage points. As for homes, a so-called mansions tax, a council tax surcharge on properties worth more than £2 million. For the gambling industry, much higher taxes on remote and online betting, and a new charge for the drivers of electric vehicles of 3 pence for every mile they drive to replace lost fuel duty revenue. The 2-child benefit cap will be scrapped from April next year, meaning parents of larger families can claim more benefits. The minimum wage is to rise by 4.1% to £12.71 per hour. And there'll be an increase to the state pension, with people on the full rate receiving an extra £574.60 a year. So, high tax measures in a high-stakes budget, as our political editor, Beth Rigby, reports.
The Chancellor put in a brave face on it, but this a difficult second budget, bringing acute political jeopardy for her and this government.
Chancellor, is this budget about your own survival? Will it be your last?
That red box carrying manifesto-breaking tax rises, that was bad enough for this embattled Chancellor, and it was about to get a whole lot worse. Soon after Rachel Reeves set off an unprecedented blunder, the budget accidentally published by the fiscal watchdog before the Chancellor had even stood up in the Commons, sending markets into turmoil, spoiling the Chancellor's pitch and adding to the sense of chaos engulfing this government.
This is what has just been published. This is basically the budget.
So surprising is this leak ahead of the budget, and I cannot stress how I have never seen anything like it.
Mr. Speaker.
Look at this. That's the Chancellor finding out her budget had been accidentally leaked. Clearly furious.
I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
This is deeply disappointing and a serious error on their part. The Office for Budget Responsibility have already made a statement taking full responsibility for their breach.
After the worst possible start, she moved on to her pitch.
Today's budget builds on the choices that we have made since July last year. To cut NHS waiting lists, to cut the cost of living, and to cut debt and borrowing. These are my choices. Not austerity, not borrowing, not turning a blind eye to unfairness. My choices are a budget for fair taxes, strong public services and a stable economy. That is the Labour choice.
Her choice to deliver that, another massive tax-raising budget, 26 billion more in taxes, taking Britain's tax burden to a record high by the end of this Labour term. A Chancellor going back on promises made in the manifesto and her first budget as she froze income tax thresholds for 3 more years, dragging nearly 2 million people into paying more tax.
I will maintain all income tax and equivalent national insurance thresholds at their current level for a further 3 years from 2028. I know that maintaining these thresholds is a decision that will affect working people.
And that was just the start, with taxes on electric vehicles, pension contributions, landlords, gambling, houses worth over £2 million. The Chancellor using tax rises to reassure the markets she's wedded to sound public finances. Some sweeteners too. Bigger than inflation rises in the minimum wage and state pensions, a cut to energy bills, rail fares frozen and a 2-year freeze on fuel duty. And for her party, action on child poverty.
Because I am tackling fraud and error in our welfare system, because I am cracking down on tax avoidance, because I am reforming gambling taxation, I can announce today, fully costed and fully funded, the removal of the 2-child limit in full from April.
This delighted her backbenchers.
I commend this statement to the House.
But the leader of the opposition going for the jugular.
She chose to spend more and more money she didn't have, leaving taxpayers to foot the bill. She is out of money, out of ideas, out of her depth, and she has run out of road. The country simply cannot afford a Chancellor who can't keep her own promises. Her position is untenable, and she knows it.
And drawing a clear dividing line on the welfare cuts Labour's ducked.
Labour are hiking taxes to pay for welfare. This is a budget for Benefit Street, Madam Deputy Speaker.
From that to this, Labour to a London hospital. The NHS safe ground for this trio.
Oh, that's better.
But what of those broken pledges? In the budget in 2024, you said extending the threshold freeze would hurt working people. It would take more money out of their pay slips. Today, you've just broken your manifesto pledges and your promise to millions of workers in the budget last year you would not extend the threshold. How in good conscience can you stay on in your job?
In the manifesto, we were very clear. It was the rates of income tax, national insurance and VAT. But I'm not going to get into semantics. I do recognise that I was asking ordinary people to pay a little bit more. But I've managed to keep that contribution as low as I possibly can by closing loopholes and asking those with the broadest shoulders to pay more.
Just acknowledge you've broken a manifesto pledge, because you have. The IFS have said you have.
Well, if you read the manifesto, we're very clear. We say the rates of income tax, national insurance and VAT. But if you're asking, does this have a cost for working people, I acknowledge it does. I said that in the budget last year. I'm not going to pretend otherwise.
Rachel Reeves told us all a year ago when she announced a massive tax-raising budget that she wouldn't be coming back for more and she would protect working people. Well, today she's torn up those pledges. It's a budget that goes against the spirit and the tone of the general election. But this is a government fighting for survival. And this is a budget, in the words of one cabinet colleague, about self-preservation, not about the country. After all, that general election is still years away. This is a Labour budget for Labour backbenchers, and it might buy this Chancellor more time. But as for her credibility, that might not be recoverable.
Well, Beth joins us live now from Downing Street. So not only has she come back for more, but again making big increases to taxation. So what is your assessment then, Beth? How has it gone down?
Well, look, Anna, the first thing to say is that this is a government that is lifting the tax rate, the tax burden in this country to its highest ever level, and this is a Labour administration that in the run-up to the election told us clearly time and again that taxes were too high on working people. They had costed their manifesto, they had set out their tax plans, and they wanted to keep taxes low. 2 budgets later, they have blown that promise with £67 billion of tax rises in 18 months. And what the Chancellor did today with that 26 billion on top of the 40 billion in the first budget is raise taxes on workers, on the wealthy, on business. And she's done that to build up her emergency buffer, and also she's done that to fund more welfare. So that's where we are. How has it gone down? Well, for the markets, as I said, the Chancellor raising more taxes instead of borrowing more to build her buffer. And the markets like this because it makes them more confident that she won't have to keep chopping and changing, coming back for more tax rises, making emergency cuts. So the markets quite like that, and the Chancellor will be really pleased about that. The second audience, I think, in this budget were Labour backbenchers, because actually what the Chancellor has done here is she has lifted welfare spending. The £3 billion on the 2-child benefit cap, it was totemic for many Labour MPs. In the run-up to the general election, the Prime Minister explicitly told me he wasn't making it a manifesto pledge because he had to take hard decisions, and it was something that the country couldn't afford. He's turned about on that, as has the Chancellor, and add that into other welfare reversals in terms of the disability benefit cuts that were reversed, or the reversal on winter fuel allowance. You're clocking up to about £10 billion in increased welfare spending. That would more than cover the freeze on tax thresholds that will pull 800,000 people into tax in the first place, and another 1 million workers into the higher level of tax. And so when I talked about a cabinet minister talking about a self-preservation budget, I think what they were getting at is that Rachel Reeves and the Prime Minister have kind of bought themselves time because they've seemed to have placated a restive party. I saw some of the PM's team coming into Downing Street this evening, early evening, to go and brief him about how it had gone down, and they looked pretty pleased with themselves. But as for the country, as for voters, this was a Labour government that promised change. It was a Labour government that said it would grow the economy to renew Britain, that it would try and keep taxes low. And actually what you've seen today are downgrades in those growth forecasts. And so, you know, that promise of change, it seems far away. Manifesto promises have been broken. And I guess the question is, the Chancellor, while she will probably survive all of this, can she ever regain the trust and confidence of voters that put their faith in this Labour government, only to find a year and a half later it's the same old Labour putting up taxes to fund public spending?
Beth, updating us there from Downing Street. Thank you. Well, as we heard there, the measures announced by the Chancellor mean that the Treasury's tax take, that is tax as a share of the economy, will increase to an all-time high by 2030. And as Beth mentioned, the markets seem to like her approach. But let's look now in more detail at how it will impact people's finances and the wider economy. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has this analysis.
An extraordinary budget day. In between Rachel Reeves standing there in front of Downing Street and her going into Parliament, the entire contents of the budget were published inadvertently by the Office of Budget Responsibility. And have a look at what that did to markets. This is basically showing you the rate at which the government borrows, the 10-year government bond yield. The higher that is, the higher the cost of borrowing in the UK. The thing the Chancellor's trying to hope it's not going to do is go higher. That's basically what happened after the mini-budget, remember, in 2022. News of the report broke. And just look, this is minute by minute what happened to those government borrowing costs. They went all over the place, yo-yoing about as everyone is trying to react to this total surprise, unprecedented moment. We've never had the budget in its entirety, essentially, being entirely leaked to the public before the moment of actual official publication, before the Chancellor even stood up in the Commons. But here's the key thing for her. This line came down. The government's cost of borrowing came down. In other words, markets, the bond vigilantes, whatever you want to call them, they liked it. They liked this budget. And why did they like it? Well, in part because the government is reducing its borrowing by taxing more. It's a pretty significant thing here. Now, this is just showing you the growth forecast. This is the bones of the budget here. This was last time around. Growth of 1% this year and then stronger growth in the future. This time, look at the latest numbers. Stronger growth this year, but weaker growth every year of the forecast horizon. Weaker growth, and that weaker growth means you get less tax revenue in the future just because of the economy growing faster, which means also, all else equal, your borrowing numbers are going to be higher. Now, it wasn't that long ago that £100 billion of borrowing was considered really high. Well, now, in these latest figures, we've got another 2 years of over £100 billion borrowing figures. And then here's the striking thing about this. This is showing you borrowing numbers, the total amount the government's deficit is each year. The first year that borrowing actually is lower than it was in the last forecast isn't until 2029-30. In other words, all of the hard work in this budget happens late. And when I say hard work, what do we mean by that? We mean basically taxes. Have a look at this. This is showing you taxation across the UK. This is the tax burden, as it's known, taxes as a percentage of GDP. The last government said taxes were going to go higher. The Labour Party, in their manifesto, said we're kind of going to raise taxes about as much as the last government did. Then they got into office, and look at what happened to the tax burden. The higher that line is, the more we are all due to pay in taxes in the future. That was last budget. Look at this budget. Even higher. So we're going to have unprecedentedly high taxes in this country, partly higher national insurance, partly higher pension fees, and also we're all going to be drawn into higher income tax, even if the rates don't actually go up. And put it all together, and this is just showing you, in each parliament, going back to the 1970s, how much taxes were cut and how much they were raised. And look, only 2 budgets in, this is where we are in this parliament. The biggest tax-raising parliament that we have had in recent history. It's a really striking chart, just underlining that this was a big moment for the UK economy, but markets, they rather like that.
Ed Conway there. Well, Rachel Reeves insists that her budget will lead to a fairer, stronger Britain. So does the public agree? Our business correspondent Paul Kelso has been finding out.
A caffeine kickstart for Kai on a day he might need it. A plumber with a growing business, waiting to hear what the Chancellor was brewing up for him, his employees and the economy.
And what are you hoping for from the budget? What are you looking for today?
Look, I think with a lot of us, let's say working class, it's just a case of dealing with the cards that we're dealt with. Obviously, we hope for change and lower taxes and stuff, but ultimately it's a case of do what we're told.
Kai employs 7 engineers working across Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire and Cambridgeshire, earning north of £45,000 a year.
Cutting public spending, leaving communities and entire regions behind, starving our economy of investment and...
He heard Rachel Reeves announce an £8 billion stealth tax increase that will affect him, his staff and those aspiring to join them.
Yeah, it seems like the same thing year on end. Work harder, pay more tax. The thresholds, well, have been frozen again until 31, wasn't it? So it's just a case where we see less of our money. Look, yeah, tax the rich has been a thing for a while, or but I still don't think that it's fair.
On the edge of the Chilterns and just half an hour by train from central London, Hitchin is the most expensive market town in England for first-time buyers and has above average salaries. It flipped from Conservative to Labour at the election and is now precisely the kind of place being squeezed harder by the Chancellor.
So Rachel Reeves has made her pitch. Taxes will rise to put the public finances straight, but also to fund welfare spending that she said she'd cut. The net effect is that household incomes are going to be squeezed. What's striking in an affluent town like Hitchin is it's quite hard to find anyone who thinks this budget was for them.
We're going to be paying more while other people are going to be getting more money and they're not going to be working, and I just don't think it's fair.
Yeah, I think if you're from a generation where you're trying to do well for yourself, trying to do things which were once possible for everybody, which are not possible for everybody now, like buying a house, starting a family like we just have, it's extremely difficult.
I've come from like a hard-working background, and the thought that people that aren't working or entitled to money for free are just going to be topped up and get more, I just think it encourages the opposite.
The cost of living crisis has not entirely passed Hitchin by. This second-hand toy stall does brisk business.
We weren't sure whether that would work, but actually the opposite was true, that actually some of the affluent people are struggling, as well as those on lower incomes. So it serves the purpose for both ends of the economy, really.
This is why I always come here, because if you have a look, there isn't a box, but look at the price. Now, there's nothing wrong with that at all. The elderly, they're struggling, bless them. The sick, people with young children, they're all struggling. Even if they're working, they are struggling.
The Chancellor has targeted savings as well as earnings, hoping to raise almost £5 billion from national insurance on salary sacrifice pension contributions.
It's going to be a clear disincentive for people to save additionally into their pensions. I mean, what we find is that a lot of some of our clients, their staff, if they have a good year, are entitled to a bonus, they will sacrifice their bonus and put it into a pension.
The long wait for this budget is finally over. The hard work may just have begun for those paying for it. Paul Kelso, Sky News in Hitchin.
Well, there's plenty more analysis on our web and app. If you want to find out whether you're better or worse off after today's announcements from the Chancellor, then you can scan the QR code on your screen right now to use our budget calculator. And of course, number 11 Downing Street will closely be watching the reaction to the budget in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Well, now to a story developing tonight, and the two members of the US National Guard have been shot and wounded close to the White House in Washington, D.C. 500 more troops are being deployed in the city, and President Trump, who's currently in Florida, says the shooter will pay a very steep price. Well, the FBI Director, Kash Patel, has just given an update.
Today at approximately 2:15 local time in Washington, D.C., where two of our brave members of the National Guard and the Department of War were brazenly attacked in a horrendous act of violence. They were shot. They're in critical condition. As you can see behind me, we have assembled the full force of both the federal and state and local law enforcement agencies to bring bear all of our resources to make sure we find the perpetrators responsible for this heinous act. And make no mistake, they will be brought to justice.
Well, let's go live to the scene then, and our US correspondent Mark Stone. And Mark, the National Guard on the streets of American cities deeply contested. This incident throws that into sharp focus. So what is the latest you're hearing?
Well, on that, we do not have a motive yet. Those that spoke to us here a few moments ago were quite clear that they do not understand what the motive is at the moment. But what I was struck by is that the federal investigators, the FBI and the city police and the city authorities all wanting to show a sense of unity. So while there is clearly controversy surrounding the decision to deploy the National Guard, and that was the president's decision here in D.C. and other cities, they are clearly wanting to show a sense of unity here. Yes, the National Guard deployment has been controversial, but that does not make individual members of the National Guard unpopular here in the city. Not at all. Quite the contrary. In fact, there is support for the individuals, even if the policy is controversial. Let me show you the scene where we are at the moment. We're in Farragut Square, just a block or so from the scene. That police car that you can see on the left there, that is the point at which the two National Guard members were shot. It was 2:15 in the afternoon, and we're told that a gunman emerged from around the corner. We don't know what sort of weapon he had. We do believe the National Guard were armed, but it's not clear if it was they that returned fire or somebody else. But we do know that the suspect is in custody and has been injured. There was some confusion earlier on today, Anna, about the status, just whether or not those National Guard members were killed or not. The governor of West Virginia suggesting that they had died. That has quickly been clarified. They are in two separate hospitals here in Washington, and they are in a critical condition. But I guess the positive news out of an awful day here in Washington is that they have survived and they are receiving medical treatment.
Mark, keeping us up to date there. Thank you. 3 men have been arrested over a large fire in Hong Kong, which has left at least 44 people dead and nearly 300 others unaccounted for. Reports suggest the fire spread along bamboo scaffolding, engulfing at least 5 neighbouring apartment buildings. Sky's Emma Birchley has more.
Flames lick high into the night sky over Hong Kong. as 7 towering apartment blocks burn. Trapped inside, residents who couldn't escape. Just how many is still unclear. It's thought the blaze started on bamboo scaffolding being used in major renovations of the vast, densely packed complex. The temporary structure and netting escalating the spread, first within the 32-storey block and then beyond, with windy conditions not helping. More than 200 fire engines and ambulances were sent to the scene. But with the inferno raging, firefighters have faced a huge challenge, and among the dead, at least one of their own.
Debris and scaffolding of the affected buildings are falling down, so pose additional danger to our frontline personnel. Besides, the temperature inside the buildings concerned are very high, so it's quite difficult for us to enter the building.
The fire began in the middle of the afternoon. One witness spoke of hearing a loud noise at 2:45 p.m. and seeing the blaze erupt. It was only earlier this year the government said it would start phasing out the use of bamboo scaffolding for public projects over safety concerns. Those who escaped were clearly in shock, as others were rushed to hospital. The complex is made up of 2,000 apartments, thought to be home to 4,800 people. It's situated in the northern Tai Po district, close to mainland China. Temporary accommodation has been set up for those who've lost their homes and everything they own. They will have no choice but to start again. But too many who lived here have died here, their loved ones left behind to mourn. Emma Birchley, Sky News.
A 54-year-old man has pleaded guilty to seriously injuring people when he drove into crowds at the Liverpool Victory Parade in May. Paul Doyle admitted all 31 charges, including 9 counts of causing grievous bodily harm with intent and 3 counts of wounding with intent. More than 130 people were injured in the incident, with police saying it was sheer luck that no one was killed. A warning that this report from our North of England correspondent Katie Barnfield begins with footage of the incident.
Celebration turned to horror. Crowds of Liverpool fans screaming as Paul Doyle drives a car directly into them. 134 people were injured, some thrown into the air or trapped under his car. The youngest, a 6-month-old baby.
I heard shouting, then I heard screaming, and then there was like people come flying towards me, and then bang. The pain was absolutely incredible.
Rob Dark was one of those who was seriously hurt, left with life-changing injuries as his foot was crushed under the car. Doctors told him he almost lost his leg.
Oh, there was people lying about all over the place, and it was like a bomb had gone off. I mean, you've seen the video footage. It was just carnage everywhere. Yeah, and crying and screaming. And I thought, terrorist, that's the first thing that came to my head. And my son, who else would do a thing like that?
It was a shock development here at Liverpool Crown Court this morning as Paul Doyle suddenly changed all of his pleas to guilty on what was meant to be the first day of his trial. He sobbed in the courtroom as he admitted all 31 charges against him, including causing and attempting to cause grievous bodily harm to a string of victims, including several children.
Thousands had gathered on the streets of the city to watch Liverpool Football Club's Premier League Victory Parade in May. Streets were closed off for the open-top bus to pass through, but Paul Doyle drove around traffic cones and followed an ambulance onto the streets where crowds were gathered. Prosecutors said he got agitated and decided to put people's lives in danger to push through, while police said it was sheer luck that no one was killed.
Driving a vehicle into a crowd is an act of calculated violence. This was not a momentary lapse by Paul Doyle. It was a choice he made that day, and it turned celebration into mayhem.
Liverpool Football Club said their thoughts are with all of those affected by the horrific incident, and they hope today's conviction brings them some peace. Addressing Paul Doyle, Judge Andrew Menery said he should expect a lengthy custodial term when he's sentenced for these serious offences next month. Katie Barnfield, Sky News in Liverpool.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. So what will the verdict of the newspapers be to today's budget? The Guardian has this. I'm asking everyone to make a contribution, while the Daily Mail has this: spiteful raids on strivers to lavish billions on Benefit Street. Back with that and more after this break.